Hi guys, welcome back to Iron Wiki! Today we're going to be making a tiny, well I consider it tiny because I don't usually make things that small. I've been tending to smaller recently, but you know, usually not this tiny. Moodstone pendant. A dear friend on Facebook asked me to make some pendants for her granddaughters. And this one will be for the 5-year-old, and this isn't the one that I'm going to send her. I'm going to make her another one. She wants one with a little amethyst in there for her birthstone. And this tiny pendant, because it's so tiny, is really quick to make. If I had put this out to full length, you know, watching me do it all real fast without having to show anyone, it would have taken less than an hour. Less than an hour, I'm sure. And I finally got requests for Wikipedia articles. Not exact ones, but still, I'm going to count it as a request because finally someone. Let's see. About nuclear accident or military alien encounters, which I think both are interesting. I'll talk about those. No problem. Not this episode, though, because I already have something planned for this episode. Today we're going to be talking about Sam Patch and Annie Edson Taylor, and if there's time, Clem Sohn. They're interesting, and they are early American daredevils. So, let's get started. This Wikipedia article about Sam Patch is very truncated. It was still let you know, what he was all about, but it doesn't mention that he started working in a cotton mill when he was 8, and that's the same time that he started his love affair with hard liquor. Probably led to him not caring what he jumped off of. Or that, since he was working in a cotton mill in the early 1800s, you know where that cotton was coming from. And his very first jump, but not his first, he's been jumping since he was a tiny kid, but his first famous jump that he invited people to come watch, he did just stick it to the rich. So here we go, Sam Patch. Sam Patch, born in 1799, died November 13th, 1829, known as the Jersey Jumper, the Daring Yankee, or the Yankee Leaper, became the first famous American daredevil after successfully jumping from a raised platform into the Niagara River near the base of Niagara Falls in 1829. His early life. Sam Patch was born to Mayo Greenleaf Patch and Abigail McIntyre, and was the 5th child of the family that included Molly, Greenleaf, Nabby, Samuel, that would be Samuel the First, he died when he was an infant, and then Sam Patch was also named Samuel, and Isaac. Imagine that, going through your life with the name of your deceased infant brother. Anyway, Sam was raised in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where he began working as a child laborer spinning cotton in a mill. When he was not working, he entertained other boys by jumping off a mill dam. By his early 20s, he was working at a mill in Paterson, New Jersey, and was jumping off ever higher spots. He was beginning to attract crowds for his well-advertised stunts. On September 30th, 1827, he jumped off the 70-foot, 21-meter Passaic Falls, the Great Falls of Paterson in New Jersey, pleasing a large crowd that had gathered. He repeated this jump at least 2 more times on August 11th, 1828. Patch jumped 100 feet at Hoboken, New Jersey. He became known in the press as Patch the Jersey Jumper. Patch continued his career jumping from bridges, factory walls, and ship masts. Niagara Falls. In the fall of 1829, Patch gained fame by leaping into the Niagara River near the base of the Niagara Falls. Patch was the star attraction at an event designed to draw visitors to the falls. A 125-foot ladder was extended over the river below Goat Island, opposite the Cave of the Winds. Less than an hour before the scheduled noon jump, a chain securing the ladder to the cliff wall snapped, breaking 15 feet from the ladder. Rescheduled for 4 p.m., Patch jumped on time from a height of more than 80 feet. A boat circled near the entry point, but Patch did not appear. When he was finally spotted on the shore, a great roar went up from the crowd. Bad weather and the delay in his arrival drew a disappointingly small crowd for this jump, so Patch announced that he would repeat the feat a second time from the greater height of 120 feet on October 17th. A few days later, 10,000 gathered to watch and keep his word. Following his feat in Niagara Falls, Sam Patch achieved nationwide fame. His name became a household word, and his slogan, "Some things can be done as well as others," became a popular expression across the nation. I think I might have to use that. Some things can be done as well as others, which is just a nonsense phrase. Rochester. Shortly after Patch went to Rochester, New York to challenge the 94-foot, 29-meter-high falls of the Genesee River. On Friday, November 6, 1829, in front of an estimated 7,000 to 8,000 spectators. Patch went out onto a rocky ledge in the middle of the falls. He first threw a pet bear cub over the falls, and the cub managed to swim safely to shore. Patch then successfully jumped after the bear. His last jump. His first jump into the Genesee River raised a disappointing amount of money, so he decided to repeat the stunt 1 week later on November 13th, 1829. That is, Friday the 13th. This time he increased the height of the jump to 125 feet, 38 meters, by constructing a 25-foot, 7.6-meter stand. Accounts from the 8,000 crescent differ on whether he actually jumped or fell, but he did not achieve his normal feet-first vertical entry. A loud impact was heard, and he never surfaced. Rumors were passed that he had hidden in a cave at the base of the falls and was enjoying all the excitement he had created, but his frozen body was found in the ice in Charlotte, Rochester, early the next spring by Silas Hudson. He was about 30 years old. Local ministers and newspapers were quick to blame the crowd for urging him to jump and to put guilt of his death on them. He was buried at Charlotte Cemetery near where his body was found. A wooden board, now gone, was placed over his grave. It read, "Here lies Sam Patch, such is fame." His legacy. Sam Patch's legacy continued to build in the years following his death. He became a popular folk hero in both written poems and stories, as well as a hero of a series of theatrical plays by actor Dan Marble, entitled Sam Patch the Yankee Jumper, followed by Sam Patch at Home, a London tour of Sam Patch in France, and Sam Patch the Jumper in 1844. President Andrew Jackson named his horse Sam Patch in Patch's honor. His legacy continues into the 21st century with media references, including the band Piñata Land chronicled Patch's 1827 jump in a song titled "The Fall of Sam Patch" on their 2008 album, Songs from the Forgotten Future. The IFC comedy sketch shows Birthday Boys reference the story of Sam Patch as a running gag callback during the 4th episode of their 2nd season entitled Freshness. The podcast, The Memory Palace, features a story of Sam Patch in the episode Plummeting Approval. Drunk History, love that show, features Sam Patch's story in Season 4, Episode 2, Legends, played by actor and comedian Kyle Mooney. Canadian musician Tim Kingsbury adopted the name Sam Patch for a musical project. Sam Patch is a name given to a replica Erie Canal packet boat that provides tours on the Rochester area waterways. Literary references. Sam Patch's Fearsome Leap, a tale in Grandfather Stories by Samuel Hopkins Adams, is a reconstructed first-hand account of the day of Patch's last leap. It's not clear whether Adams based the tale on a real first-hand account or wrote it as a historical fiction. Patch appears as a daring moral hero in the works of Hawthorne and Melville, and also appears in the poem Patterson by William Carlos Williams. The Adventures of Patch and His Bear, as narrated by the bear himself, comprise the picaresque novel by William Getz, Sam Patch, Ballad of a Jumping Man. And that's all Wikipedia has to say about Sam Patch. I suggest you look him up and have a read. It's fascinating. Next, we're going to talk about Annie Edson Taylor. I don't have any outside little facts outside of Wikipedia, but I'm sure there's much more to be said about her. So here we go. Annie Edson Taylor, born October 24th, 1838, died April 29th, 1921, was an American schoolteacher who on her 63rd birthday, October 24th, 1901, became the first person to survive a trip over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Her motives were financial, but she never made much money from her adventure. Early life. Annie Edson Taylor was born on October 24, 1838, in Auburn, New York. She was one of 8 children born to Mary Edson, 1804 to 1850, and Lucretia Waring. Her father owned a flour mill and died when she was 12 years old, leaving enough money to provide a comfortable living for the family. She became a school teacher. She received an honors degree and a 4-year training course. During her studies, she met David Taylor. They were married and had a son who died in infancy. Her husband died soon after. After she was widowed, she spent her working years in between jobs and locales. Eventually, she ended up in Bay City, Michigan, where she hoped to be a dance instructor. Since there were no dance schools in the Bay City at that time, Taylor opened her own. She moved to Sault Ste. Marie, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, in 1900 to teach music. From there she traveled to San Antonio, Texas. Then she and a friend went to Mexico City to find work. Unsuccessful, she returned to Bay City. Niagara Falls. By 1900, Taylor had fallen upon hard times, having been burned out of her home and having lost money invested with a clergyman. She claimed to be only 42 years old at the time, suggesting that she could make money more easily if she were younger. Having always associated with the best class of people, the cultured and the refined, Taylor believed that she needed money to hold her place in the world. Hoping to secure her later years financially, she decided she would be the first person to ride over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Taylor used a custom-made barrel for her trip, constructed of oak and iron and padded with a mattress. Several delays occurred in the launching of the barrel, particularly because no one wanted to be a part of a potential suicide. 2 days before Taylor's own attempt, a domestic cat was sent over the Horseshoe Falls in her barrel to test the strength to see if the barrel would break or not. Contrary to rumors at the time, the cat survived the plunge, and 17 minutes later, after she was found with a bleeding head, posed with Taylor in photographs. On October 24, 1901, her 63rd birthday, the barrel was put over the side of a rowboat and Taylor climbed in, along with her lucky heart-shaped pillow. After screwing down the lid, friends used a bicycle tire pump to compress the air in the barrel. The hole used for this was plugged with a cork, and Taylor was set adrift near the American shore south of Goat Island. The river currents carried the barrel over the Canadian Horseshoe Falls, which has since been the site for all successful daredevils stunting at Niagara Falls. Rescuers reached her barrel shortly after the plunge. Taylor was discovered to be alive and relatively uninjured except for a small gash on her head. The trip itself took less than 20 minutes, but it was some time before the barrel was actually opened. Taylor was helped out of the barrel by Carlisle Graham, a friend and the first man to run the rapids on a raft. After the journey, Taylor told the press, "If it was with my dying breath, I would caution anyone against attempting the feat. I would sooner walk up to the mouth of a cannon, knowing it was going to blow me to pieces, than make another trip over the fall." Later years. She briefly earned money speaking about her experience, but was never able to build much wealth. She wrote a memoir and returned to Niagara Falls to sell it. Her manager, Frank M. Russell, ran away with her barrel, and most of her savings were used towards private detectives hired to find it. It was eventually located in Chicago, only to permanently disappear sometime later. She spent her final years posing for photographs with tourists at her souvenir stand, attempting to earn money from the New York Stock Exchange, briefly talking about taking a second plunge over the cataracts in 1906, attempting to write a novel reconstructing her 1901 plunge on film, which was never seen, working as a clairvoyant, and providing magnetic therapeutic treatments to local residents. Her death. Taylor died April 29, 1921, aged 82, at the Niagara County Infirmary in Lockport, New York, and was interred next to the English-born daredevil Carlisle D. Graham, 1815 to 1909, in the Stunter's Rest section of Oakwood Cemetery in Niagara Falls, New York. Her funeral was held on the 5th of May, 1921. She attributed her bad health and near blindness to her trip over the falls. Next, I'm going to read about Clem Sohn, and this is just a very short little article about him, probably because he didn't live very long. Clemens Joseph Sohn, December 7, 1910 to April 25, 1937, was an American airshow daredevil in the 1930s from Fowler, Michigan, USA. He perfected a way of gliding through the air with a homemade wingsuit. Who hasn't thought it to him? Anyway, he had himself drop from an airplane at a height of approximately 6,000 meters, and he would glide down until he was only 300 to 250 meters from the ground, at which point he would open his parachute for the final descent. He made the wings from zephyr cloth mounted on steel tubes, forming a large web under each arm, which was clasped to his hips. A feature of the wings was a device to prevent them from opening out too far and ripping his arms from their sockets. A loose cloth formed another web between his legs, which acted like a bird's tail. His large goggles gave him an appearance which led to his becoming known as the Batman, or the Batwing Jumper. Clem was badly injured during the opening ceremony of Gatwick Aerodrome in London, England, when his primary parachute tangled in his wings. He broke and mangled his shoulder on landing. After opening his emergency parachute at an altitude of only 60 meters and crashing into a taxi. Sohn's career came to an end on April 25, 1937, in Vincennes, France. Before taking off, Clem had remarked, "I feel as safe as you would in your grandmother's kitchen." During his descent on that day, his parachute did not open. A crowd of 100,000 watched him frantically tug on the ripcord of his emergency chute. That failed too. And Sohn, 26 years old, plunged to his death. Marketing. There was at least one attempt to exploit Sohn's fame with a product tie-in. A UK manufacturer made the Welcome Clem Sohn Birdman Glider, featuring a red-suited male figure with fold-out arms and rubber wheels, and it is now a collectible. And that's the end of poor Mr. Sohn. Moving on to a lady named Rosa Matilda Richter. Rosa Matilda Richter was born April 7, 1860 and died December 8, 1937, who used the stage name Zazzle, was an English aerialist and actor who became known as the first human cannonball at the age of 17. She began performing at a very young age, practicing aerial stunts like tightrope walking in an old London church. She took up ballet, gymnastics, and trapeze by the time she was 6, and at 12 went on tour with a traveling acrobat troupe. In 1877, she was the first person to be fired out of a cannon in front of a large crowd at the Royal Aquarium. Journalists and public voiced their concerns for her safety from the time of her earliest appearance as Zazzle. She was named by a lawmaker as one of the reasons for proposed legislation in England to prevent dangerous acrobatic stunts, leading her to take the show to the United States. She toured Europe and North America with the circuses, including Barnum and Bailey, executing tightrope, trapeze, and high dive routines in addition to the human cannonball. Throughout her career, she suffered several accidents and injuries, the most serious of which largely ended her career in 1891. During time off from the circus, she started an opera company with her husband and took singing roles in some of its productions. She also volunteered time writing and holding exhibitions to promote the life-saving potential for safety nets. Good call. In her early life, Richter was born in London in 1860 to a father from Dresden and a mother from Birmingham. Her father, Ernst Karl Richter, was a well-known talent agent who supplied performers and animals to circuses and other productions. Her mother, Suzanne Richter, was a dancer in a circus. She was the second of at least 4 children. As a child, she was taught how to fall before she was taught how to perform, practicing in an old condemned church in London, where her wires stretched from the chancel down through the nave to the gallery and her net spread below. She began her performance career at the age of 4 or 5, playing one of Cinderella's sisters in a pantomime at the Raglan Music Hall. She was only filling in for another child who had fallen ill, but according to the New York Clipper, she filled the role so well that she became a favorite and gave a series of additional performances at Drury Lane Theatre. She received ballet lessons from a respected instructor and subsequently took up gymnastics, learning from teachers named Sturgenbach and the Levanti brothers. She also became active as a trapeze trapeze artist from the time she was 6 years old, performing for the first time at Garrick Theatre in Whitechapel. She became known for a leap of life stunt on the trapeze, which she performed throughout her career. During some of these early performances, she used the stage name La Petite Lulu. When she was 12, she joined a traveling Japanese or Siamese acrobat troupe with whom she honed her balancing skills and she would rely upon throughout her circus career. They traveled to put on shows in Dublin, Marseille, and Toulouse. Although she was English, a contemporary article in the Clipper said she was known as the only Japanese girl that ever visited Europe and received many medals and awards for her daring and skill. During the show in Toulouse, she suffered the first of many accidents during a performance, falling during a trapeze act. Her injury was severe enough that it took her away from performing for a short time. According to her father, it was because he would not sanction further performances. Richter returned home to London in 1873. The Human Cannonball at the Royal Aquarium. The Human Cannonball Act was conceived by William Leonard Hunt, a Canadian daredevil who went by the name the Great Farini. He was known both for his own high-wire performances, such as when he crossed Niagara Falls, and for the high-profile performers he managed. Before Richter, Farini's best-known act was his adopted son Samuel Westgate. Starting in 1870, Farini dressed him in women's clothing and began advertising performances for the beautiful Lulu, the girl aerialist, and the Circassian catapultist. The Lulu act was very successful and became known for stunts which involved Westgate being launched by catapult, either into a net or up to a trapeze. It was not until a serious accident sent him to the hospital that his true identity became known. Lulu's catapult act led Farini to conceive a cannon-based act. In 1871, years before its first public display, he filed a patent in the U.S. for a certain new and useful apparatus for projecting persons and articles into or through the air. When the Royal Aquarium in London hired him to improve its profitability, he did so through spectacular acts like the Human Cannonball. Ernst Richter was familiar with Farini. Years prior had sworn that he should never have a dog of mine, much less a daughter, for his dangerous performances, he added. What indeed would the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals say to Farini firing off even a donkey from a cannon? Suzanne Richter was not so protective, however, and Ernst said she misled him into signing an agreement that he believed would be with one of his friends, not Farini, and would only have Rosa singing and dancing. In April 1877, the 17-year-old Richter became known in Europe as the first human cannonball, performing as Zazzle, the beautiful human cannonball, although Hunt's son Lulu had been performing the human cannonball act since 1873. The Mackie Mercury wrote that the event hurled her from the jaws of death into the arms of fame. She was fired out of a spring-style cannon before traveling through the air and landing in a net. Accounts of the event vary on the distance she traveled, citing between 6.1 meters, 20 feet, and 21.3 meters, 70 feet. The cannon used rubber springs to limit the distance she would travel. Although Farini had filed another patent in England in 1875 and in the US in 1879 for an adaptation of the cannon so as to use explosives as a means of releasing the catch. He was already using gunpowder-based explosion for effects during the show. Most sources, including the Guinness Book of World Records, cite Richter as the first human cannonball. However, the claim has been contested by others who claim that the Australian Marvels, Ella Zuila and George Loyal, performed the act a few years earlier. Zuila and Loyal were hired by Adam Forpo, an American circus owner, who learned that his rival, Barnum, may bring Richter to North America. The duo were a featured attraction at Forpo's Circus and drew comparisons to Richter for their similar aerial stunts. Their cannonball stunts differed somewhat in that rather than being fired from a cannon into a net, oil was projected from the cannon and caught by Zuila, who would be hanging upside down with her knees over the bar of the trapeze. Richter was featured at the aquarium for an extended period of time, performing sometimes twice a day and often to a full room of people. A single performance could draw in tens of thousands of people. Farini also brought her to perform at other venues in Western Europe. Lewis Cook wrote in the Billboard, that the breathless silence that always preceded the act while it was being prepared only added to its intensity, and the graceful bow of the young lady who had the temerity and the muscular strength to withstand the shock and presence of mind to guide her flight never failed to receive a round of rapturous applause. After seeing it multiple times, a writer for the Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News, the name of that paper, that's amazing, Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News, wrote a gushing review of the act in the 26th May 1877 issue. It praised her unhesitating confidence, the graceful ease and swiftness of her motions, together with her placidly smiling face, which destroy all sense of fear for her safety in the minds of the audience and enable them to enjoy the spectacle of her extraordinary agility, strength, and seemingly terribly daring feats with none but pleasurable, although strongly excited sensations. The author went on to describe the mix of anxiety and delight in the audience member that should expect to experience, and noted that Richter counted among her fans future King Edward VII, who reportedly attended 2 of her shows when he was Prince of Wales. Music often accompanied her performances at the Aquarium. Music director Charles Dubois composed waltzes for her, which featured prominently in some of the show's advertising. Freeney also wrote a song, Zazel, which was sung by George LeBourne and published by Musical Bouquet. The Human Cannonball was not her only act. She began performing a high dive at around the same time, also at the Aquarium. Well, that makes sense. High dive at the Aquarium. For that stunt, she would make repeated jumps from the raised platform into a net, gradually increasing the distance until she reached a peak of 29.6 meters, 97 feet. The West Australian wrote that she would start atop a proscenium arch, fall 27.4 meters, 90 feet, into the net, and pop up to smile at the audience. She also walked the tightrope, increasing the difficulty by sometimes foregoing the standard balancing pole. She would also include tricks such as running, standing on one foot, putting baskets on her feet, lying down and sitting on the wire, and spinning around while holding it with her knees. The Era wrote that the dive was astounding, and that she is wonderfully clever and graceful on the tightrope. Well, I thought the dive would be in the water at the Aquarium. What was I thinking? Accidents and public response. Once the Human Cannonball act started and became popular, people began protesting the perceived danger of the show and tried unsuccessfully to have it stopped. Concerned complaints made their way to the Home Secretary, Richard Ashton Cross, who told the Aquarium's manager, Wybrow Robertson, that he would be accountable should an accident befall Richter. In response, Robertson invited Cross to be fired out of the cannon himself. Richter's first Human Cannonball accident was at the Aquarium, followed by another in Portsmouth in 1879, where the net used to catch her was rotten due to the wear and she fell through. Though she did not break any bones, her condition was serious enough that she could not perform the next day. The Citizen wrote about the outrage expressed at the apparently sloppy safety checks that had missed the poor condition of the net. If the public demands such sickening exhibitions, then most certainly it is the bounden duty of those in authority to see that the precaution is a reality and not a farce. The Graphic insisted, when will the Home Secretary be made to see the necessity of putting some restraints upon the suicidal, sensational, acrobatic feats which are now, to our shame, be it said, so popular? An 1880 issue of the Orchestra likewise scolded audiences, saying that these acts prove the morbid taste of the public who delight in such exhibitions. After the Portsmouth accident, Ernst Richter went to the office of the periodical Truth to talk to one of its writers. It had published the opinion that someone ought to prevent her from performing such a dangerous act, and Ernst came to ask them how he could do just that. He was afraid for her safety and wanted to get her away from Freeney and his stunts. By that time, Ernst had left the entertainment business, worked as an engineer, and had separated from Susanna, with whom Rosa lived, and who raised no such objections to the potential for danger. Ernst said that the newspapers say that someone ought to interfere to hinder her from risking her life for money. I am her father, and I want to interfere. When the cannon is fired off, her limbs have to go rigid. If by mistake it is fired one moment too soon, she might be killed. When she takes her dive, if she did not fall lightly, she would break a limb. And if the net underneath is rotten, as it was at Portsmouth, she might be killed. The truth reporter admitted he did not know much about the law, but said that he should talk to the magistrate to ask how to get an injunction, opining that the justice system should indeed prevent girls and children from risking their limbs in order that, with or without the consent of their parents, their taskmasters may deserve a profit. Well, she's an adult. She can do what she wants. Later that same year, on the 15th of December, 1879, she fell during a trapeze performance in Chatham, Kent. The New York Clipper reported that the net seemed not to be much protection in the spot she landed, and she was in apparently senseless condition, exclaiming, "I am killed! I am killed!" as she was taken away from the performing area. She was not found to be seriously injured and later performed again with her hands bandaged, and evidently suffering from great nervousness. And that's all the time I have on this video, but everybody should head over here and see about the rest of her life. She loved performing, but was also passionate about safety. Make sure all performers would be safe in the future, but also how they tried to pass laws to just prevent her from performing, so she wouldn't get hurt. Just her, though. And stay tuned, because I have one more granddaughter pendant to make, and it's going to be also a mood stone, but it's going to be a horse-eye shaped faceted stone, so that'll be a little bit different. Okay, and thank you so much for hanging in there with me and enjoying these Wikipedia articles and hanging out with me while I make things. Thank you so much, and see you next time.